Dawn's on my screen, Nigel.
She's on your screen.
I can see her.
She's not on my screen.
She's waving at me as well.
Oh, yes, she is. Hello, Shine. Welcome. Okay. Right, we're just after 4, so I think we'll kick off. People will be joining us as we carry on, but we must make a start on, I think, what's quite an ambitious programme, even for 2 hours, but we'll see how we get on. Welcome, first of all. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Nigel Baldrow, co-founder and now the convener of the Norfolk Green Care Network. And this is the last in our current series of what we've called Networkshops on a topic which I think is very of the moment, shall we say, green social prescribing. Grace, who's also here from our deputy convener for the network, is going to be monitoring the chat for questions, because obviously we've got quite a few people here. And I think what we'll try to do in the 2 sort of question and discussion sessions is to ask Grace to perhaps pick out a few questions, just so that we manage to cover perhaps the right territory and we keep to time and so on. But please, apart from introducing yourself in the chat, please use that to ask questions as we go along. It is an ambitious programme. We will work roughly in 2 halves. The first half really is focusing on social prescribing as it is today, green social prescribing as far as we can tell as well. And also the second half, we're focusing on looking ahead and some very interesting, I think, presentations to come on that. I had hoped that Professor Jules Pretty from the University of Essex was going to be joining us today to give the first session, but unfortunately due to personal health problems he's not been able to make it. So I'm very grateful to him, because he's basically sent me his slides, and I'm no Jules Pretty, I can guarantee you that, but I'll do my best to run through those in terms of what I've called the case for green social prescribing, and that will be the first item on the programme. And hopefully, if I can get the technology to work, I will share my screen and I will run through quite a lot of slides. I apologise for that, but we will be sharing these after the event, so hopefully you can look at them in a bit more detail later. Fingers crossed. Okay. Right, here we go. Hopefully you can all see that. So the case for green social prescribing. I'm hoping to go through very quickly what do we mean by social prescribing, what is green care, what it is at the heart of green social prescribing, what's the evidence in terms of its impact, what's been the impact of the pandemic, has that changed anything? I think we all know it probably has in significant ways. And finally, some of the challenges. And as I've said, I'm very grateful to Professor Jules Pretty, but also Professor John Newton from Public Health England, whose slides I've also incorporated into this, and Dr. Rachel Bragg from Social Farms and Gardens, whose material I've also used. So what do we mean by social prescribing? Well, the definition given on the NHS website, which the link is there if you want to look at this, a key component of universal personalised care. Talk more about that in a moment. It's a way for local agencies to refer people to a link worker. Link workers give people time, focusing on what matters to me, taking a holistic approach to people's health and well-being. They can connect people to community groups and statutory services for practical and emotional support. And link workers also support existing community groups to be accessible, sustainable, and help people to start new groups, working collaboratively with all local partners. That's the vision, I guess. What does that mean in practice in terms of the sorts of referrals that come through to these link workers? Well, I think there are probably 4 main types. The need for advice or knowledge, so perhaps information about benefits or housing. Skills development, that could be anything from computing, cooking, gardening, and so on. Activities in social groups, befriending, dance, crafts, walking, community gardening, conservation, so on. Or activities with more specific therapeutic aims. So what are being referred to as nature-based interventions like social and therapeutic horticulture, forest bathing, and so on. And you'll see that green care and green social prescribing is obviously part of a much bigger picture. What do we mean by green care? Well, it's enabling people to connect with nature to promote health and well-being, and also care for the environment. That's the definition that the Green Care Network uses, and it probably is quite a wide definition compared to some definitions of green care, which tend to focus much more on those deliberate, if you like, therapeutic interventions. What do we mean by this? Well, if you've seen our website, you will know that we sort of break it down to 6 broad areas, running around those very quickly from the top. Sensing nature, so something as simple as looking out of your window and seeing a pleasant country view, or plants and gardens and so on, visiting those. Green exercise, walking, running, cycling, nature and wilderness therapy, all of these outside, of course, rather than in a gym. Gardening, that can be individual, of course, but also community, school gardening and food growing. There's social and therapeutic horticulture as well. Forestry, environmental conservation and learning, so conservation groups, forest schools, and so on. Farming, particularly I think focusing on community farms, city and care farming, and paying visits to those. And then finally, which is often a key component of those care farms, interacting with animals, which can be, of course, anything from horse riding, dog walking, pets as therapy, and so on. So you'll hopefully see there's quite a wide definition that we've used. The dimensions of green care really fall into 2 groups. There are some things that they share in common with other activities, so creative activities and other activities that are, if you like, beneficial in terms of health. But they also have a number of what we call natural dimensions from this book that's referenced at the bottom. And those can be summarized as a sense of connectedness, which perhaps fulfills for some people a spiritual need. Nature as peaceful and calming. A belief in the inherent health of nature and fresh air. A fascination with nature.
Nigel?
Yeah.
Can I interrupt?
Sure.
Nigel? Can I interrupt? Sorry, I do apologise. I think there are still some people not muted because I'm getting a lot of interference. So could you just ask if that could be done, please?
Yeah, thank you. Did everyone heard that? Can you please mute yourselves to avoid feedback? Thanks very much. Hopefully you all got that. Third point, belief in the inherent nature of health of nature and fresh air. Fascination with nature. A sense of fulfillment from nurturing plants and animals. A sense of fulfillment from protecting nature or working with others to maintain or improve it, so conservation work. And also being part of a dynamic system, the cycle of the seasons, weather, and also responding to those with different sorts of activities. And obviously in relation to gardening, which is one of my key activities, sowing seed, harvesting, and everything in between. Weed pulling mainly. So what's the evidence? Well, this is one of Jules's slides. He says basically there's something like 20 years plus now of research into the benefits of connecting with nature. Everyone seems to benefit, all the different sorts of environments that I mentioned there, gardens, parks, countryside, nature reserves. All ages and social groups can benefit. Every type of health status can benefit. So whether you're fully fit or perhaps not so well, it doesn't really matter, you can benefit. And all sorts of activities. So walking, running, gardening, sitting, all the things that I've mentioned already. What are the specific impacts of nature? Well, improved mental and physical health. And Jules' research, I think, particularly points out that if you've been doing something for 15 minutes plus, that's particularly beneficial, and the benefits grow with the amount of time that you spend doing something in nature. But it can also improve your length of life. There's evidence to show that walking slows the onset of dementias. Volunteers in green care projects live on average 2 years longer. And a 30-year study in Caerphilly in Wales found that when physical activity was combined with other positive behaviours like limiting alcohol consumption, having an average BMI and so on. These delayed heart diseases and promoted longer life. What can green space do for us in terms of physical health? Well, I won't read all of those phrases out. You can read yourself a few of them. Better self-assessed general health, a healthier immune system, a lower heart rate variability, and so on. And then someone came up with this rather wonderful idea of a medicine called Salutagen, which lowers blood pressure, lowers the heart rate, promotes well-being, available from all parks, seashores, forests, or countryside near you. And that comes from this notion of what's called salutogenesis, which is the process of focusing on the origins of health and the factors that support health and well-being, rather than on the factors that cause disease, which is called pathogenesis. So salutogen is the thing we're talking about today. What about mental health? Well, green space can enhance the quality of life, reduce stress, reduce rates of hyperactivity and inattention, promote emotional well-being, etc. And what are the other benefits? Well, some recent research, I think it was published in fact last year by Jules Pretty and Joe Barton from the University of Essex, looked into 4 projects in their area. These were concerned with things like woodland therapy, run by the Greenlight Trust, therapeutic horticulture, run by the project called Trust Links Growing Together, ecotherapy or green care, the Eco Minds project, and also Tai Chi, a local mind-body intervention in their area. And what they found was very interesting. It had a major impact on the use of public services. People who participated in these projects made less GP visits, had less A&E visits, and interestingly, there were fewer police incidents, which becoming increasingly significant perhaps for frontline workers and the police particularly. But they also went on to try and assess the economic benefits or savings benefits of these activities. And I don't pretend to understand or even get close to understanding the methodology that you use, but the results were quite interesting. They found that the cost benefit, if you like, in terms of these activities for each person resulted in reduced health and public service use, which amounted to just over £800 a year. So every year, that figure is a saving for every individual that participated in this project. Reduced loneliness, which had a saving of about £700 a year. And the whole notion of increased life satisfaction and happiness, which resulted in that whopping just over £9,000 per annum saving or benefit, if you like, to the public purse. So not only there are the obvious health and well-being benefits, but these track through to benefits in terms of the money that's required to be spent on public services, particularly health services. What about access? Well, this is an interesting one. Clearly there is some inequality in terms of being able to access green space. This chart shows people from minority ethnic groups and others, and their access to a private garden. So on the left-hand side, we have the figures for all groups, and you can see just over 10% of people there don't have access to a garden. And as you move across the graph, you'll see as we get into mixed, Asian, Black, and other groups, that the proportion without access to a private garden significantly increases. And in fact, for people with a Black ethnic minority ethnic background, the figure is something like 35%. We can also look at access to public open space and deprivation. Again, apologies for the rather busy chart, but let's just focus on 1 or 2 key points here. Along this horizontal axis, you've got a level of deprivation from the worst 10% in terms of deprivation through to the least deprived at this end, the right-hand end. And we've got an index on this vertical axis, which, as it says down here, is looking at the ratio of green space to the per thousand population. And as you can see, if you just look at general green space, which is the orange column, you can see that as deprivation reduces, so the amount of green space that's available to the population living in that sort of area increases quite dramatically, and there's a steady increase. The same is true for public parks, that's the black column. And the same, I think, is more or less true for the purple figures, which is the sports grounds. It's again, similar sort of thing. But interestingly, when you look at playgrounds, which are the grey columns, almost the reverse is opposite, that the most deprived communities seem to have more provision in terms of playgrounds, which raises some interesting questions. But that isn't the only way of measuring access. That obviously measures it in terms of access to a particular space, an area, if you like, of green space. You can also measure it in terms of the time it takes to get to a green space. And this more recent information from the ONS, as it says here, says parks are most accessible in the poorest areas, which you would think would go against what I've just run through here. With people in the most deprived neighbourhoods of England about twice as likely as those in the least deprived to be within 5 minutes walk of a public park. And when you include playing fields, that rises even further. So it raises some interesting questions about the time it takes to get to an open space, and also the amount of open space that's available. And obviously between those two, there are important questions about the quality of that space and what it does for you in terms of enabling your connection with nature. One final thing on access, looking at access to public parks, again, looking at the idea of how long it takes to get to a public park. This measures the percentage of the population within different areas and regions within 5 minutes walking distance of a park or playing field. Interestingly, you can see that London, as it says here, has the highest percentage of its population within easy reach of a public park up the top here. That's the dark column, and if you include the playing fields, it's even greater, nearly 60%. Interestingly, if you look further down, and if you look at particularly third from the bottom, the east of England, which suggests that just over 20% of the population living in our region are within 5 minutes walking distance of a park. When you look at playing fields, that goes up to what, 45, nearly 50%. So some interesting regional variations there, and again raises the question, I guess, about where you live. The east of England, I guess, is largely a rural region compared to London, obviously, and it raises the question about access to the countryside, footpaths, country parks, and so on. So I guess the point here is that access is perhaps a little bit more complicated than just doing a very straightforward analysis of deprivation and people's access to green space in urban areas in particular. What about the pandemic? Well, is it a threat? Is it an opportunity? Well, I would suggest to you it's probably a bit of both. Looking at the positive side for the moment, the importance of green spaces and access to green spaces has become much more, I think, noticeable in the last year. And a survey here by Natural England, showed that nearly 90% of adults agree with that statement, that it's important to have access to green space, and the same also for children, particularly those from deprived and black ethnic minority households, which I think traditionally have been lower participators, if you like, or lower connectors with these spaces. We've also seen, I think, an increased value placed on exercise, and information from Sport England shows there's been growth in walking, cycling, and also a greater connectedness within local communities through being outside together. And the final positive thing, I think, is the growth in families exercising together, and that being done perhaps on the basis of connecting with other families as well. What's referred to here as the social reward of participating together with others, and obviously reducing isolation. On the negative side, and these are selective indicators, the reasons for which I'll explain in a moment, there's obviously been a lot of extra pressure on parents and families, balancing work, caring responsibilities, supporting children's education, and so on. There's been an exacerbation of domestic abuse, parental drug, alcohol dependency, and severe parental mental health issues. And finally, the importance of cultivating and sustaining greater support networks for parents and children. They need a wide range of trusted sources of support to get through this. The reason I mention those few is because, as some of you will know, we've been active in developing a project called Families Connect. And these are some of the statistics and background information that was used to make the case for this project, which is all about enabling families with children to connect with each other, but also to connect with nature as a way of, if you like, improving their circumstances. And as Natural England says, really, nature solutions will play an important role in helping the nation recover from the current emergency. What are the challenges to finish off with? Well, one of the things that I think Jules Pritting in his work discovered is that one of the challenges for green activities of various kinds is turning those activities into habits. It's all very well going along and visiting your park, but how often would you do that? Basically, he was, I think, coming to the conclusion that it takes 50 hours plus of involvement in something outside for you to turn it into a habit, which is obviously the most beneficial thing to do. And he gives the example of learning to drive and how long that takes and how it becomes habitual, obviously, after a period of time. Secondly, it's not for everybody. And I think there is evidence that people, for various reasons, dip in and out of different activities. Some are what's called negative responders. It doesn't really appeal to them at all. And therefore, what do we do about that? How can we follow up and engage those negative responses? Well, I think one of the answers they're suggesting is that we need to offer a range of options. So yeah, green care has got a part to play, green social prescribing has got a part to play, but we need to involve perhaps other options and promote other opportunities. And certainly behind Families Connect, one of our hopes is that we will be enabling some more creative partnerships at grassroots level between nature-based projects and activities, but also arts and crafts, exercise, and a whole host of other things as well. And finally, I think there's a challenge about investment. It's about investment, I think, in community as well as individual focused opportunities. As the Department of Health and Social Care says here, prevention and early intervention programs represent good value for money. That perhaps, reinforces the messages that Pritty's research I just mentioned highlighted. But it's also, I think, the key point here is that we can refer individuals as individuals with their needs to individual opportunities and activities, but we also need investment in community-based opportunities, which are particularly focused, I think, on promoting health and well-being, as well as, if you like, treating ill health. And finally, access. Well, I've already made the point. It is a perhaps more complicated area than first meets the eye, but there's no doubt that some people have easier access to ways of connecting with nature than others. And so that is certainly a challenge, I think, for us going forward. I'd like to finish off by just showing you a very brief, less than 5 minutes film, which was, I think, produced for Social Prescribing Day last year by the conservation volunteers. And if I can get the link to work, it will, I think, really underline what green care is really about, because I think there's nothing more powerful than hearing an individual story, if you like, about what it's done for them.
Hi everybody, it's Social Prescribing Day, Happy Social Prescribing Day. My name's Gregory.
Nigel.
Yeah.
I don't think we see the video.
No, okay.
And I'm the Managing Director of the Conservation Volunteers Health Programme, the Green Gym. The Conservation Volunteers have been working to develop social prescribing over the last few years with funding from the National Lottery.
My apologies. I thought we would possibly have problems with the technology, so I think we'll abandon the film. My apologies for that. But basically, it tells a very interesting, I think, story about an individual who's benefited particularly from some nature conservation work with the Trust Conservation, the conservation volunteers. I hope that's been useful. We'll move on rapidly to getting an input from Sean Brand and Tim Philigoff, who are both involved at a regional level in the social prescribing programme. Welcome to you both. Thank you very much indeed for coming along and contributing. You're going to give us, I think, a regional perspective, if you like, on where things are at and maybe where they're going. So over to you.
Thanks ever so much, Nigel. I'm going to kick off and I've got some slides to share. I'll be giving basically an overview of where we're at generally with social prescribing, touching on some of the elements of green. But obviously you're the experts in that in this particular geographical area. So here we go. Let me just share my slides with you. Won't be a second. Can you see that first slide?
Yep, lovely.
Excellent, excellent nod there. Thank you. Okay, so Tim and I are NHS England associates. So we're not employed directly by NHS England, which gives us some freedom to be supporting without the sort of ties of performance management and the nasty bits that other staff have to undertake. So we get a really fantastic job of, as regional facilitators, supporting areas on the strategic development and embedding good practice around social prescribing and local innovation. So it's a fantastic bit to be invited here to talk to you today as local innovators in green social prescribing in the Norfolk and Waveney area. So we support all 6 systems in the east of England. So that's Norfolk and Waveney, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, Beds, Luton and Milton Keynes, Hertfordshire and West Essex, Mid and South Essex, and North East Essex and Suffolk. So it's quite a wide area and very varied, but we are really, really fortunate to have such a huge expanse of coastline to start with, but also some fantastic inland water opportunities and some brilliant green spaces. Across the region, we also have access to the learning coordinator, and I take on that role as well. Both of these roles are replicated across all the regions for NHS England. And the learning coordinator has a much more practical role of supporting directly the link workers in their learning and development to ensure safe and high quality practice, but also to keep them updated with anything that is emerging. So in this past year, 18 months, we have been highlighting the benefits of green and blue social prescribing and the opportunities, and also supporting the region in applications for some recent funding around some pilots to develop good practice green social prescribing. Unfortunately, the East of England wasn't successful in any of those bids. However, we do know that for some areas that work is going to continue anyway. So we're going to keep close to that and see what's learned and then share it with our link workers and connect them to those opportunities. As a learning coordinator, I also really advocate the use of things like Action for Happiness, 5 Ways to Wellbeing, around that opportunity as a segue to link to those green and blue opportunities for people in communities. We've also identified over the last 18 months that almost 2 years actually, that PCNs have come into play, that there is a gap in the PCN's understanding and knowledge and skills of social prescribing. So Tim and I put an offer out to all PCNs to support practice staff, clinical and non-clinical, to understand the benefits and opportunities of social prescribing, the opportunities of community, explaining the role of the voluntary sector, and explaining things like the benefits of connecting to nature for people, particularly with mental health and physical difficulties that they're experiencing in terms of challenge. So we also help facilitate the East of England Social Prescribing Network. It's a multi-agency network. It's been going a number of years now, and Tim and I have hosted a number of regional conferences. It's a collaborative approach, and it also now links to the NASP Thriving Communities programme and the regional roles that are developed there. And Julie Ringer is going to be talking about this a bit later. So I just want to show you how our structure is for that particular programme. So you can see at the bottom here, the East of England facilitators and how we are supporting through NHS England all of these coordinated roles. And we have a core group that actually brings all of those together. So we're not going to duplicate our efforts and be tripping over each other, or indeed ignoring the gaps that may be existing. And here is the network, the wider network that encompasses a number of key partners including Health Education England, Public Health England, the Health Science Network, Local Government Association, and many others. So I'm going to hand over now to Tim, who's going to talk a bit more about system working and developments for social prescribing. And I'll do your slides for you, Tim.
Thank you, Sian. I appreciate that very much. So I'm going to say a little bit about where we've come from. As Sian mentioned, back in January of 2019, we got the NHS plan, and that's when NHS England's version of social prescribing kind of was invented. Since then, there are something like 1,500 link workers now in primary care networks across England, and Sian's better informed than me on this, but probably a good 150 in the region. And that's fantastic, obviously, because green, like any other social prescription, is great if someone tells you it's there or helps you be motivated to think that it's for you. But some of the people we're most worried about will never have that conversation. And we know from the Social Prescribing Observatory nationally that currently social prescribing is happening equally across the 5 levels of deprivation. Well, that's not what we expect or want to happen. We would expect more social prescribing to be happening with the most deprived. And a bit like the parks that they seem to have lots of, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're feeling that it's safe to go there or they want to go there, etc. The point of this first slide is really about, I think everybody talks about a no wrong door approach and trying to make sure that people can get to the support they need. And obviously that's a key function of the social prescribing link worker. But the way that they have been commissioned through the primary care networks means there is a risk that in any particular place, they may all be functioning totally independently. This slide is based on what's happening in Herts and West Essex, and I'm not for a moment saying that's what everyone should do. I think I'm just making the point that it's really important that you do understand the system you're all functioning in, because otherwise Fred Bloggs will go and talk to someone who won't know anything about green, won't know anything about social prescribing, and he'll never get to find out that thing that could have transformed his life. So it's really important that we've got a map like this, whatever it consists of. One of the interesting things we do have in Hertfordshire, though, is Herts Help, which is a single point of access to the 12,000 or so entries on the Herts Direct database of community activities and services. And similarly in West Essex, they have Live Well, Link Well, and the Frontline service. So there are lots of different ways of constructing this, but I just think it's really important we're all thinking about how we pull this stuff together. Next slide, please, Sian. And I don't know how many, those of you who hate acronyms, there's a whole bunch coming up here, but the important point is that all those primary care networks are expected to have a shared plan for social prescribing. And that's obviously part of NHS England trying to make sure that those links are made so that the people do get to the end product that's most helpful to them. And I guess the question for all of us is, have we got the right people linked up talking about what should be in those plans? And that's something that Sian and I would be very happy to talk to you about if anybody wants help with any of that. But I think it's really important that those assets are joined together. Next slide, please. The other thing that has happened is that there's been this global pandemic, and the model of social prescribing that was promoted in the original guidance in 2019, which is still, there's nothing wrong with it, it's incredibly valuable and it's spot on the money. It's the travel agent model, as we sometimes describe it. So the idea is that somebody says, oh, I'd quite like to do something to improve my well-being, usually referred by a GP or someone. And then following that referral, they'd be helped to think about what was important to them, and then the right kind of mix of green and benefits advice and exercise or whatever would be put together, and off they go, happy as Larry. Well, that was pre-COVID. And obviously the moment that the first lockdown happened, the usual face-to-face meetings and all the other stuff stopped. And indeed, link workers were often used, and quite rightly, to do outreach phone calls, you know, very many calls, possibly a day, just to check people were getting food, medicine, and all the rest of it. So it's been a funny old year. But within that also, we've discovered a lot of positives in reaching out to people that we weren't necessarily sure they had a need, but we would find out from a certain percentage of them that they had a very serious need that no one had talked about. So I think it's in that light that we want to think about the role of social prescribers going forward. We don't want to assume that it's just about waiting for people to come forward and be referred, because a lot of people, we know from our primary care list that certain people are socially extremely vulnerable, family carers, or all sorts of other people who might very valuably be reached out to rather than waiting. So this, I don't think I want to go through all of this, but I think it's important that we do think about the elements of that role going forward, and make sure that primary care networks are talking to their local communities and to the local voluntary sector about the sorts of things that those link workers can be doing. So obviously that referral based approach will still be really important, but there's that one of the things we're doing in Hertfordshire is we've started calling people who are over 65, discharged from hospital with no ongoing needs identified within 48 hours to see how they are. And we're finding between 20 and 30% of those people have ongoing needs that no one noticed. And we can prevent them hopefully being readmitted and getting into a more balanced way of life going forwards. But there are lots of other things on this list as well, which I would encourage people to have a think about. I've mentioned carers. There's the community development role, which link workers have, which would be particularly important in building those networks of people who are interested in this stuff. And, you know, as I think it's already been mentioned, green may not be for you, but you might really like doing something with the local football club, volunteering in the stands or something. I don't know, but you know, it's about making sure it's the right thing for you. We've also got lots of people with complex but non-clinical needs turning up at A&E, and quite a lot of interesting work done around high intensity users, as they're now called. And again, it's the social inputs that we've shown can reduce their use of A&E by 40%, and so on. And I think also one of the things that's happened in Hertfordshire, I'm not sure if it's true everywhere, I think it generally is in the East. We've had a huge influx of volunteers over the last year. We've not managed to use all of them, but we're getting closer to that. But also they're changing their roles as we go forwards, less delivering of food parcels and medicines and just checking people are alive, and more relationship-based ongoing support to people to do the sorts of things that Nigel's been talking about, or the arts, or anything else. So that's all I wanted to say, really. I think it is, and as Sian has said already, we're very happy to work with systems, with primary care networks, with clinical commissioning groups, voluntary organisations, anyone who wants to talk. And obviously we work very closely with Julie, who will be speaking in a little while about NASP. Yeah, I think the future is social prescribing flavoured, but we do need to be careful that we don't drive our workers mad, expecting them to do everything. And just a few points on how we keep them safe and sane. It's really important that we know how they are plugged in, whose team they're a part. It's great if they're part of the primary care network team, but they also need to feel part of the voluntary sector. They need to be linked in. We don't want them feeling isolated. And clearly there are issues around business continuity. If they're sick, if they're on holiday, if you're just a lone worker on your own doing this stuff, what happens when you're not there? We've had some amazing surges of activity because of COVID. What happens if they occur? We recently had to reach out to people forced to quarantine coming back from India, and our link workers have been working to support some of those people. It's really important that they both get clinical supervision from their primary care network. So, you know, where it is, you do need advice from a clinician, like someone's expressing suicidal thoughts, but also where do they get their supervision around social prescribing, which is a skill in itself. And it's really important that you don't have 20 link workers all with different idea of what social prescribing is. One of the things about the way we've commissioned it in Hertfordshire, we have 73 link workers in one service, and they're all therefore collecting data about outcomes in the same way. And obviously, if you're wanting to demonstrate the impact of green in Norfolk, you would want to think about how you collect that data in such a way as to affect population health management across the piece. And again, that focus for the networking, it doesn't matter what your structure is, as long as the relationships are right and you can guarantee that information is shared, but also skills amongst those very varied groups of link workers and providers of wonderful things in the community. That is my last slide, isn't it, Sian? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tim and Sian. Very interesting, and I think particularly your positive points about helping things develop. I think we'll talk a bit later about where we go with all this, particularly in relation to green social prescribing. And I think it's fair to say that your assistance in that journey will be very valuable to us. So no doubt we'll be in touch. Thanks very much. I'm going to move straight on to Rachel Hunt from Norfolk and Waveney CCG. And also, I think when Rachel has finished, I think Andy is still here. Andy Hudson, who's also from the CCG, who's going to say a little bit, I think, about his perspective on where social prescribing is in our local area. So over to you first, Rachel.
Super, thank you, Nigel, and really, really lovely to be here. Love to see so many faces. I've got just a few slides and I'll whiz through them, but please do interrupt or ask me any questions. I do want to caveat what I'm going to say by ensuring there's no misunderstanding, because I'm not here as a social prescribing expert. My job title is Head of Integration and Partnerships for the Great Yarmouth and Waveney locality. So I work with a team of integration and partnership colleagues, and one of our roles is to really support partnerships and connectivity with the local voluntary sector. And I have for a while been passionate about social prescribing, worked to set up social prescribing 5 years ago in Norwich, former Norwich CCG locality. So it's sort of a pet love of mine, but I'm definitely not here really to so I suppose be that local expert, but really keen that people know of me and I can try to help join up the dots really. So let me just share my screen and make sure I'm sharing this properly. Sorry. Is that okay? Can everybody see that correctly? So one of the key messages I want to get across, and thank you for a brilliant introduction, Nigel, and a great summary from Sian and Tim. And we've picked up in the chat about sort of the use of acronyms in the NHS, which I hugely apologise for, but I have got a slide in here about primary care networks and what they are, so I can answer any questions after, but I hope that will become clearer as to the structure that we've got around us and what we need to work within Norfolk and Waveney to really get the best out of the opportunity to connect the dots within the social prescribing arena. So just to really give a very brief introduction, social prescribing is identified in the NHS long-term plan, and it's a key component of something described as universal personalised care. So it is an element of personalisation, and personalisation is something that we want to be really focused on over the next 5 years. There's a huge emphasis on how important it is to really understand what matters to individuals and really ensure that we develop services with a real clear understanding of what's important to people, and social prescribing is a very important part of that. I'll happily share these slides afterwards. I don't need to go through this in a lot of detail, but there's a bit of a summary there as to what the key commitments are in the long-term plan, which is sort of connected to social prescribing. So I did just mention the language, what matters to me, and I think that was also picked up in Tim's presentation. And I think we've all got an understanding now of what social prescribing is, but it is about that connectivity for individuals into their local community and sort of support services around them. And the diagram on the right-hand side is the NHS England's model for what social prescribing is, and the orange at the bottom is a core component of recognising what's important to individuals to create a personalised plan of care, but also that it's a much broader approach, and that the social prescribing link worker is sort of fundamental to really enabling significant connectivity. So whizzing through these slides, we just wanted to spend a bit more time that we can focus on our local landscape. Sorry that if the image is a bit blurry, it was as best as I could get, but on the map we've got some shaded coloured areas which are currently the localities. So the orange parts is where I work from a Great Yarmouth and Waveney perspective. So there's 5 areas which are the footprints, the former footprints of the 5 CCGs that we had until April 21, when all the 5 CCGs merged to become Norfolk and Waveney CCG. And within those the smaller areas that have been identified are the primary care networks. And the primary care networks are groups of GP practices who are working more closely together. So identified themselves to come together, and they're named here. And their role is to really connect with the wider community, but also wider health and statutory services, with the main focus of improving health outcomes and using things like population health management to really understand where there are opportunities to improve outcomes and to join the dots up really in terms of service delivery. So they're working to improve neighbourhood level care. And primary care networks are in receipt of national funding, which is called the Additional Role Reimbursement Scheme. And as part of that, social prescribing link workers are one of a number of different roles. So that also includes physios and pharmacists and associate physicians and paramedics, a number of different roles which have been identified as sort of a cornerstone for the workforce for primary care networks moving forward. And this is really the funding route we have locally. I think it's really important that we understand when we're moving forward, actually what we can work within and what our local funding structure is for social prescribing. I should just add that until April 21, we also had Norfolk County Council funding a quite extensive pilot of social prescribing, so it's a 3-year pilot really looking at how and different models offered in each different area, looking at really where the best outcomes and best ways of structuring social prescribing going forward. I understand from that piece of work that the top reason, which I think would be quite interesting for this group, the top reason for referrals into the Norfolk County Council funded sort of project, which was formally evaluated, was social isolation and loneliness. Second to that was benefits and financial advice, and thirdly, housing issues. Obviously, we all know that it's very unusual for individuals to have a single reason for a need to be supported through a social prescribing link worker and be connected into wider services, because the complexity of individuals' lives isn't ever in that sort of linear way. But from sort of really high level information that I was aware of, I think it's really important because it feels like the opportunity to connect into our green and blue assets locally is ripe and a huge opportunity. The majority of referrals that we have coming into our social prescribing service is via our general practitioners, through our GPs and their teams. So there's another huge opportunity as well for something that Tim identified, is that within primary care networks, it's vital that social prescribing link workers are seen as a referral mechanism and referral access for the whole community. So my sort of final slide is that primary care networks, as they are in receipt of NHS England funding through the scheme I've just described, can either directly employ their own social prescribing link workers, or they can contract with, most often, the voluntary sector. So we have a real mixed economy across Norfolk and Waveney. We don't have a single access point, and we don't have a single structure and service to work within, which potentially can be quite challenging. But I do think what we need to try to do is understand that local landscape and understand how potentially we can work with it. And that's potentially why I'm so keen to be here, because I think that's part of my role within my locality, and my peers as well are very keen to make sure that we understand the huge opportunity to work with local partners, as Tim's identified, the links with our health outcomes and what we want to be achieving for better connectivity and use of our services, but also to improve the health outcomes of our local population. So of importance to note for this group really is that not only do social prescribing link workers have a significant responsibility to deliver quality social prescribing services within their own networks, but they also have the following sort of 3 responsibilities which I've picked out of the national guidance. So to work with their local communities to enable local BCSC organisations to receive social prescribing referrals, to collaborate with local partners to support the voluntary sector to become more sustainable as a result of the need for social prescribing onward referrals, because actually social prescribing needs that onward referral mechanism, and to promote services available through the wider community, so that colleagues within the primary care network understand the local landscape and understand the assets and potentially the gaps that we can all then work together to try to fill and understand. So at this point, I don't know whether I can just call on Andy to see if he's got anything further he just wanted to add. Andy Hudson is Head of Personalisation for Norfolk Waveney CCG, and he may well have some sort of more insight into the next steps for our local system. Is that all right, Andy, to hand over to you?
Yeah, no problem, Rachel. Thank you for that. I don't necessarily need to introduce myself now because you've done such a great job.
Shall I stop sharing as well?
Welcome, Andy.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I guess just my thoughts in terms of next steps, and I guess some of the key challenges which kind of Rachel referred to. I guess for us in Norfolk, there doesn't. I think what we've uncovered is there's no real kind of system leadership that's grabbing hold of social prescribing right now. And I think the challenges which kind of Rachel highlighted, I think we clearly need someone within a role that is going to be able to kind of do that piece of work. So we're fortunate enough to receive funding from NHS England on the kind of personalisation agenda and deliverables. So the next step for us is to invest in a kind of key system role, which we're currently working on sort of job descriptions, and we'll be feeding into kind of Sian and Tim for their expertise from other systems around what a good system leader would look like as part of a pilot to bring all of those pieces of work together. I think for us, there are challenges around consistency and how social prescribing is used. There are challenges around kind of support networks, around supervision, around kind of directory of services, a whole kind of range of different sort of governance aligned to social prescribing. So for us, the next step is to get a key individual in post to start to kind of work with the PCNs and work with the kind of partnership leads across all of the system to try and get some sort of framework really for Norfolk and Waveney and some sort of consistency, but also working within the kind of nuances of populations as well, which no doubt won't be an easy challenge. But so that's the next steps for us really, is to try and grab hold of this, the good work that's there, and try to kind of get some sort of uniformed consistency and a framework to social prescribing.
Lovely, thank you very much, Andy, and thank you, Rachel. Did you want to come back on anything Andy said, Rachel?
All I was going to say is just to really support what Andy said by confirming that we do have social prescribing link workers within all our primary care networks. So there is a real appetite. Some employ more than others directly, some contract services with the voluntary sector. So there is a real commitment, and I think it's definitely a new way of working in general practice. Let's be honest, this is not traditional a health model of services, but actually in the new world from post-pandemic, colleagues realise across the system the impact of inequality and wider determinants of health is a sort of a cornerstone of that, and how we need to be moving things away from a medical treatment model. And we understand that really health outcomes are affected by a whole host of other areas which the GP themselves and their health colleagues wouldn't be able to have an impact on. So I think we've got a good bedrock to start from. But what Andy's described as actually we've got some work to do within our local system to try to help joining up the dots. But it's great that we've got the enthusiasm from the Green Care Network, but also other voluntary sector partners who are really keen to support that journey. So we're not doing it in isolation, we're doing this together as part of our integrated care system.
Great, thank you both again. We'll move into, I think, a bit of time to people to reflect and questions and so on. Basically, I think what you've said is the foundations are there, and we're at a critical stage in terms of, you know, how we now build on that, really, isn't it? So, you know, today's event is perhaps quite not important, but certainly, you know, hopefully going to help, if you like, in clarifying things. Grace, have you been monitoring the chat, and have we got any particular questions you'd like to pull out?
There was a question from Helen, which might have been answered, so I'd like to hear from her if she still has it, about exactly how does this linking up and connecting the dots happen between community groups and small businesses under a social prescribing network. Helen, do you feel the question's already been answered from Rachel and Andy in particular?
Yeah, I'm still not 100% sure how we can kind of, you know, I mean, we've been working in the local community for a long time, and we're doing a lot of these things. I've always had the model of social prescribing in my head for a long time, you know, and I've heard about what's happening, but I'm just not quite sure how we can kind of access that in our local community and some of the structure and, you know, for training of the people who are already working and doing some of these jobs.
Sean, looks like you've got a response.
Yeah, so obviously all of the link workers are linked to GP practices. So if you're in the community and run a group and want to be connected to your link worker, probably the easiest way is to ring your local practice. There aren't many schemes across consistently Norfolk and Waveney area that have singular employers that would make it an awful lot easier to connect to a group. So we've got quite a lot of individual link workers employed by primary care networks. In terms of the training, I'm just wondering what Helen is talking about in terms of the training of the link workers, or?
Well, what we're doing, I mean, we are actually in close contact with our GP surgery, because I personally am a survivor of, you know, I have lived experience of severe mental health conditions, and the people that are working alongside us also are. So we've kind of, a lot of us been out of work for a while, we haven't updated our training, so we're kind of working, we're doing the stuff, but it's just, we haven't, you know, it's that, you know, being able to have access to Microsoft Teams would infinitely improve our, you know, what we're doing, but we don't have access to those kind of things. But it's that kind of thing, and just making sure we're fitting in with the systems and training and safeguarding, and just making sure we are not just working to our own agenda, but we're fitting in with what's actually right with the whole country and what's going on everywhere.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to give my perspective on this. I've worked in the voluntary sector and supporting it from a commissioner perspective in health for many, many years, and Tim might want to add in afterwards. I would highly recommend that you link to your local authority and your local infrastructure organisation. So you may have something called a Council for Voluntary Service, or it might be Community Action Norfolk, a similar organisation that provides support to community and voluntary sector groups in local areas. And they are well equipped and knowledgeable in how to make sure these groups are safe, equipped, trained, and connected to the opportunities that suit their activities the best. So I would definitely be looking to your local infrastructure organisation, or your local authority would be able to advise you around that as well. Tim, would you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to say what she said, but also I'm not wanting to steal Julie Ringer's thunder. I think there's also a function for us regionally working with NASP to fill the gaps where the infrastructure organisations aren't being able to provide certain training, and also to share between CVSs in the region some of the skills that are around, because obviously there's not going to be hodds of dosh around for the foreseeable future, and it's about building on the skills that we've already got in the region and sharing that around. Julie, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
just going to say, if you're not stealing my thunder, by the way, Tim. Helen, if you want to, I've put my email in the chat box. If you want to drop me a line, we can have a chat and see where you are and what the closest, you know, what the closest local authority for you is and where their community team is, and we can hook some links up there for you. It's not a problem at all.
The other point that occurred to me in relation to the sort of the digital challenge is that I think that's one of the easiest ways of engaging the private sector at the moment. Certainly, we've started to get donations of kit as part of our attempts to make sure that some people have access to the internet who haven't had in the past. And those companies that have done all right during COVID are the ones selling computers and working on the internet. So they're quite good people to engage with that. And we've socially prescribed our first 2 tablets in Hertfordshire as part of that scheme, but we think that will become self-perpetuating to an extent. So I think there are lots of different reasons for talking to different organisations, and basically it's about relationships and talking, and I'm afraid you just have to keep going. But I think the momentum is incredible now with 150 link workers in the east of England, and we've got an awful lot to build on. It's just about making sure those connections are made and then maintained, which is really hard during COVID as well, I think.
Just to say very briefly before we, sorry Grace, just to say that I know Amelia is here from Voluntary Norfolk, and I think, you know, they're a fantastic infrastructure organisation that's been referred to that could possibly help Helen as well. I don't know if you want to say anything, Amelia, about what you've heard so far, or just leave it as someone to contact you.
Hi everybody. I think my colleague Laura is also on the call as well, Laura Bloomfield, but I've just put network at voluntarynorfolk.org.uk in the chat, and that's we've recently launched a network for local charities, community groups and social enterprises. So if you want to sort of find out what we do and tap into the support we can offer, that's probably the best place to start. And also if you just wanted to email me to sort of find in more detail, but I think we can provide a lot of the support, and also if we don't know the answer or we can't offer the support, we can link you into the people that do. So I'd just encourage anyone to get in touch.
Thanks. Grace, any other big issues coming through on the chat?
Annie, you had a question around where does the promoting / enabling access fail? Do you think that this has been kind of touched upon, or do you want to expand? Or you're on mute.
Hi. Yeah, sorry. I think I must have typoed if it says fail.
Oh, sorry, fall. Sorry, mine misreading.
I was wondering where the responsibility fell if a PCN had decided to kind of contract out to the voluntary service, then there wouldn't be a person. But then I think Andy Hudson was talking about exactly that as I was typing it, so I'm not quite sure whether that's still kind of a question.
I can answer that. Oh, sorry, Tim.
No, Rachel, go ahead.
So locally, we do have this sort of mixed approach in Norfolk and Waveney, where primary care networks have employed their own social prescribing link workers who are part of their general practice team, sit in the GP surgery. You know, instead of going into Dr. Smith's door, you go to the social prescribing link worker because that's your appointment. But some, so I work in Great Yarmouth and Waveney, as I described, and I've got 4 primary care networks. 2 employ their own, 2 contract directly through the voluntary sector, 1 Access Community Trust, and 1 North East Suffolk Citizens Advice Bureau. So their social prescribers sit within their voluntary sector organisations and would see or virtually see people through their normal mechanisms, but they would receive referrals from the general practitioner. So does that help? That actually it's very dependent, and that's why we're in a, you know, it's a bit messy, if I'm honest, at the moment. It's not neat and it's not easy to understand and navigate, but we potentially have the opportunity to really enable and add to that, because primary care networks are going to be receiving increases of their additional role reimbursement scheme year on year until 23-24 to really make this quite a robust offer. So hence why Andy's comments, we need to get a hold of this and do some sort of strategic framing and framework around how we can enable the right connectivity. Whilst I've got a bit of a cheeky rest, whilst I'm just on, can I answer another question which came up, which was about access to funding. I think there was a question from Iris from
and Tim as well, a couple there, Rachel. I think.
Yes, yeah. I think it's an extremely difficult situation, always funding, because we're always, living in a very challenged financial environment, and even more so now as we come out of the pandemic, knowing that actually, the waits for elective care is going to be huge. We're going to have much more pressure on the system. Currently, we do have a pot of funding through NHS Charities Together. That's linked to, if you remember Major Tom, who did a very big national campaign and lots of money was raised. Some of that funding has been given to acute hospitals across the country, but we also, each STP or ICS, Integrated Care System, or Sustainable Transformation Partnership, has been given a pot of money, and we've got just under £500,000 in Norfolk and Waveney to support partnerships based around connecting and supporting people who are affected through the pandemic. So that could be people who are on a waiting list, but it could just be, our most deprived communities who we know are most vulnerable to COVID. And through Norfolk Community Foundation, that pot of funding is open at the moment, and would, if anybody is in the space of green social prescribing, would really strongly recommend that you take a look at the opportunity there. As I say, we've got £500,000, which is a huge opportunity, but I think going forward we need to be thinking quite carefully as to how we can support more sort of funding in a financially tight environment. So I think it's a difficult one, but we do have the primary care networks being funded year on year for more social prescribing link workers. So hopefully we can be helping to join the dots up more and really make best and maximise the use of that funding.
But maybe funding, is one of those issues that, going back to what Andy says, in need of a strategic review, really, isn't it? Because it's a key issue that, I know we've come across on a number of occasions that the voluntary sector is often thought of as a free good, but we all know it isn't. And we need to address that, don't we?
100%. And sorry, and I know I'm taking over too much of the time.
No, it's fine.
Quickly mention as well, something else I'm involved in is the Norfolk and Waveney Voluntary Sector Assembly. So as part of our new integrated care system, which is really the joining together of health and social care, with the intention of really working in a much more joined mechanism. So hence my role as integration and partnerships, working with my colleagues in my local district council and voluntary sector. We have got the Voluntary Sector Assembly, which has just appointed its first chair. So it's really starting to motor, and I think that's going to be hugely influential in really understanding that equality of partnerships, so that the voluntary sector, as you rightly mentioned, Nigel, is not sort of seen as coming to the table late, not necessarily funded appropriately to being able to engage in that dialogue. And there's lots of work behind the scenes happening. So I know Norfolk County Council are currently reviewing their commissioning strategy for the voluntary sector, which is really trying to get everybody on a level playing field. And I think that it's a really good time for all these sort of conversations to be coming together to really enable the voluntary sector to be adequately resourced to deliver what it's there to do, and which is fantastic opportunity.
Thank you, Rachel. And again, thank you to all those who presented so far. I think it's really stimulated some very interesting questions and obviously discussion. We need to move on. Thank you very much for handling that, Grace. And we'll come back to you at the end for another session. Moving on, looking ahead, we've got a couple of presentations now, which I think very much building on the discussion we've had so far. And I'd like to welcome Giles Merritt from Natural England. Giles, I think you joined us fairly recently, didn't you, as Regional Health Lead, is that right, with Natural England? You can introduce yourself. Tell us about the Natural England take on green health, green social prescribing, and also these pilots that have been mentioned.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nigel. Thanks for inviting me, and hello, everyone. I'm Giles Merritt. I'm the Regional Health Lead here in the East of England. As Nigel said, it's a relatively new area of work for Natural England, and I've been in post since full-time since March. It's something which we're increasingly committed to at Natural England in ways of how we can help link the voluntary, the health and the green sectors. And so my role at the moment, a lot of what I'm doing is trying to develop those networks and work very closely with Julie at the National Academy for Social Prescribing in partnership with them to try and undertake some of this networking and find ways that we can link some of the key players in the green sector with the health sector. Natural England, we've also got 2 members of staff actually seconded to NASP as well, which really helps also strengthen those ties, I think. As I say, my work at the moment is predominantly around that networking area. I'm doing a lot of what we call mapping, so identifying what's going on where there may be any gaps, so we can maybe look at ways to improve delivery of green social prescribing in certain areas. And the kinds of organisations I'm talking to are people like the Norfolk Wildlife Trust, for example. I know Nigel's involved with them through another project. Also community forests, countryside projects such as the Norwich Fringe project I hope to be talking to in due course, and also the care farm sector, as well, of course, as local authorities who run a number of sort of country parks, for example, such as up at Holt as well. And so it's really a case of identifying who is in a position to deliver green social prescribing on the ground, and then I can go in and make those links through Sharm with the link workers to actually signpost clients and patients where it is appropriate for them to use nature as a way of improving their mental and physical well-being. So that's where we're coming from at the moment. I'm also identifying within Natural, we actually manage what we call national nature reserves, one such as Winterton Dunes, many of you will be familiar with, as well as in the west of the county, Dersingham Bog, which is a lot nicer than it sounds, believe me, well worth a visit. There could be, whether my role will be to identify the potential possibly for using our own estates, such as those nature reserves, as to facilitate green social prescribing. And I know for a fact, many of my colleagues who run the nature reserves may be saying, we manage this for nature. So some of our national nature reserves won't be appropriate for increased footfall. Many will. I mean, the Wash is a national nature reserve, but that won't be appropriate because it's intertidal seaward. So you'd get extremely muddy if we tried to send people onto the Wash in a hurry. So also we have a large area of work at Natural England called the Nature Recovery Network, which is trying to sort of bring together a lot of our strands, including planning, in looking at ways in which we can use our policy in a sort of a joined up way to embed things like what we call ecosystem services, which is a horrible phrase, which I'm never that familiar with, but it's to do with flood management, environmental stewardship for landowners to manage the land in a more sustainable way, as well as access. That's where the people and nature come in, and green social prescribing. So where we've got, say, for example, a new development on the edge of Norwich, let's say, we can be right in there right at the start to advise on how new green spaces, which may be sort of attached to those developments or nearby, would be could be designed in a suitable way to host green social prescribing. So there's a whole lot of sort of stuff going on there, which I'm involved with. So it's not just the external working with people like the Wildlife Trust, RSPB, but also internally at Natural England as well, to try and embed the health agenda from an early stage at this very early time for us being involved in the sector. I should say I don't have access to chat because of my setup here. I've got you on a phone and squinting at a very small screen. So if you have any questions, perhaps Nigel or somebody would be good enough to put my email address on the chat. That would be really helpful if there's any queries. So in terms of the 7 pilots, these are Green Social Prescribing pilot sites. They're what's called test and learn sites, and they're part of the government's £200 million shared outcomes fund, which is part of the spending review from last year. So we've got a total of £5.5 million nationally to deliver these test and learn 7 pilot sites across the country. Now, unfortunately, we weren't successful in the east of England, sadly. So the list of, in fact, sites, I'll just run through them very quickly so you get an idea. There's the Humber Coast, so sort of East Yorkshire, northern parts of Lincolnshire. South Yorkshire is another one. There's another pilot in Nottinghamshire, one in Derbyshire, Greater Manchester, Surrey, and also Bristol, also including parts of Somerset and parts of Gloucestershire as well. So those are the 7, and the focus on those on this work will be really targeting communities most hard hit by COVID, and trying to use the funding and the pilot work as a way of seeing how we can use green social prescribing to redress those issues that people are suffering in those communities. Particularly mental health. We're looking at things like anxiety, loneliness, and depression. So those pilot sites will be used to test and trial this project. And as we know from Nigel's initial presentation, there's so much evidence to show how access to green space can improve mental health and well-being. So the pilots are really building all of that evidence, and the activities that will be taking place through most of these will be things like walking, cycling, gardening, conservation tasks, as well as other things which I'll come on to shortly. I believe each pilot site has been awarded around about £500,000. I think that's the general figure, roughly, and they are being starting pretty much now. Actually, I think people are in post to deliver these. Up and they will run for almost 2 years, up until March 2023. Natural England is very committed to delivering these pilots in partnership with the NHS, NASP, Sport England, and many others. So it's a real partnership affair, this, in working with government, yes, so the pilots should be finished by 2023, and at Natural England we are currently undergoing a recruitment drive to get people in post to deliver our part of that collaboration. So really the fund will enable existing partners to expand on their existing offer in terms of access to nature. And I've got a quote here from Louise Swain, who's the ICG director for Derbyshire, and she says that the bid has enabled green providers, social prescribers, voluntary organisations, and community initiatives to come together in health, social care, and public health to deliver an exciting and new test and learn programme. So that hopefully gives you a bit of a flavour about where the sorts of areas of work that will be involved. And one of the test and learn sites in Derbyshire, the National Forest there, they now, because of this funding, they will have the capacity to deliver new ways of improving people's health through nature, simply through the funding. So they've got more opportunities to deliver the work. Greater Manchester is quite an interesting one because they're already quite a long way ahead in terms of green social prescribing, and currently 8 in 10 GPs are already referring patients to green social prescribing scenes. So the pilot there will deliver that even further, will take that work even further, and enable even more people to access open spaces. The one in Surrey is slightly different from my reading of it. So I'm not personally closely involved because we'll have other members of staff at Natural England delivering this work, but they've invited, the pilot projects have invited members of the public to fill in an interactive sort of online map to highlight what is out there at the moment. So what activities are people enjoying and recommending at the moment, and so they will use that data, identifying what's out there now, to actually shape provision in the future, and that will already that's highlighting some perhaps unusual spaces you'd expect. Say Norfolk, people would say the Broads or the coast, etc. But it's also highlighting places that mean an awful lot to people, very close to home, which I think is really important. So we're not talking about busing people distances necessarily. This could be, as we discussed, this could be nature connectedness right on your doorstep. And these are often some of these spaces are often overlooked, but exactly where people live. And I think that's important, that the opportunities for green social prescribing are everywhere. It doesn't have to be, in the middle of the countryside, away from communities, or some communities. So in terms of timescales, as I said, the award was made in March, and the actual delivery itself of the pilot work should be happening from about July onwards, I believe, and it goes up till March 2023, as I said earlier. So what will happen with what's learned? Obviously, the pilots the monitoring and evaluation will be extremely important. And so I think the aspiration is to go to government and say, look, this is the success we've had with green social prescribing through the pilots, and then with a good fortune, that will unlock further funding opportunities to develop green social prescribing further. And that's really where my work at the moment that I'm doing in terms of the networking side of things will really start to hopefully deliver more on the ground following that. So that was a whistle-stop tour of the pilots and a little bit of what Natural England is up to. I hope that made some sort of sense, Nigel. And
thank you, Charles. Yeah,
over to you.
Very interesting to hear what you're doing in terms of mapping and networking and so on. Obviously, that's the heart of what this network is about. So
exactly,
we're already connecting, and it's obviously we look forward to working more closely with you, I think, on that. And obviously also learning from those test sites as well. I mean, having access to their lessons, if you like, to help us locally will be very important as well.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. There will be some questions for you towards the end, but I'd like to move swiftly on and introduce Dr. Viola Marks, who's come all the way from Dundee. Where are you, Viola? Fabulous to see you. I think we should see you hopefully shortly. Viola leads a project called the Dundee Green Health Partnership, I think that's right, and was recently awarded the prize by the International Social Prescribing Network as was it the best green social prescribing project this year, Viola? Tell us more.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen with you. So just a second. Does that work?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, we got awarded the best nature-based social prescribing program, which was very exciting. So I'm going to tell you about this program and where it comes from and how we developed it and how we promote it as well. So yes, Scotland, I'm in Dundee right now, and just to put that into perspective, because I think you're all much further down, the little pinpoint there, that's where Dundee is. We have a population of 149,000 people, and we do have social prescribers, link workers within primary care. That's a separate project which has been going on for much longer than I have been in post. and Dundee belongs to Tayside as a health board. So we also have Perth and Kinross and Angus as part of that. However, my remit at this point is only Dundee. So what's the Green Health Partnership? So very literal, green as green spaces. These are all images taken from Dundee's green spaces, so parks as well as community gardens. And we work for all those health benefits that you've heard about earlier. And we work together in partnership to make use of those. So when I say we, I mean the third sector partners. They're scattered around the top and right corner here. I work with the third sector interface. In Dundee, this is called Dundee Volunteer and Voluntary Action, or DVVA for short. Work with the universities to work on researching and evaluating the project. So I very often have undergraduate or master students working with me. And I myself, I'm employed by Dundee City Council and I'm co-managed by NHS Scotland Directorate of Public Health. So I'm sort of a hybrid who works between the two and with everyone in between to get people outside and active and healthy. So Green Health Partnerships are funded by Nature Scot, previously Scottish Natural Heritage. We have 4 pilot projects. So we have Lanarkshire, we have Dundee, North Ayrshire and the Highlands. I certainly have the smallest area of all, but that also allows me a lot more freedom to develop projects and test them out in a population that's a very good size for pilots. So I've been in post since June 2018, initially for 3 years, and it's just been extended for another 2 from the Scottish Government Active Scotland division. So when I talk about green health, I talk about active or passive engagement. So nature-based interventions are part of this, but for me, it's also important to connect people to nature in their own time, walking, relaxation, outdoor learning, active travel, conservation, gardening, using the backyards, especially during lockdown, and looking at nature virtually or even just through the windows. So especially for bedridden people, this also has a huge benefit to them. We have a policy, it's called Our Natural Health Service, led by Nature Scot, and all of our 4 Green Health Partnerships are working under this. And it's very simple. This is the main paradigm. We have 3 pillars: everyday contact with nature, nature-based health promotion initiatives, so health walks, green gyms, outdoor gyms, but also nature-based interventions. So really the groups where we have trained staff in place who do activities with patients for therapeutic purposes. So we have a variety of different groups offering, tailoring activities to different patients and needs. And the idea is obviously that we connect people through those 3 pillars with nature to complement the NHS and work preventative, help with treatment, and also with recovery. So when I started Dundee early 2018, I did a mapping exercise and noticed that there are many opportunities, many groups are happening, but everything was very uncoordinated. So that means there was no clear approach to actually refer people to all the things that are happening. So it was for me to go out and with our partners develop a way that we can easily, from the NHS point of view, direct patients to make use of our resources right on our doorstep. So in April 2019, that was officially launched. Our pilot project, Green Health Prescriptions, was piloted in 3 GP surgeries. These are some newspaper articles. The first one, I think, is how they think Dundee looks like. This is more like it, though. And we also launched the partnership at the same time. So since then, this is what our green prescription looks like. So it's actually a formal referral pathway. It's paper-based. Now it's digital as well because COVID happened and we do try and adapt. It's printed at the same place where the medical prescriptions in Scotland, they are read. are printed. So instead of the red prescriptions, which patients are used to receiving to get their medicine, we give them a green prescription alongside the medicine or on its own, depending on the case, and ask them to join a local activity of their choice. So it's very person-centered. All activities are free to join to make it accessible. And this is just the back of it. Through our focus exercise with patients, they said that they wanted something to take away from the doctor. However, a leaflet wouldn't really do the trick for them. It hasn't worked in the past, so we decided to try prescription instead, because this is what they expect to get when they see a doctor. So we thought we'll try green prescription instead. So who refers? Well, we've moved past the programme. And so primary care, we have most GP surgeries, so this includes the staff. So every GP surgery has their own way of applying our tool. We encourage them to have receptionists, practice members, nurses, and some also have health visitors and link workers to use them. We have many secondary care services, and I've listed a couple of them here, so I'm not going to go through all of them. This has been very successful. Many people are already in the system, they already see a specialist, so it makes sense for us to offer a green health prescription for chronic pain treatment, for example, when they see their specialist. And then the third pillar is community prescribers. So we have, for example, the job centre, have a lot of people obviously unemployed, looking for jobs, looking for skills, volunteering, they can gain skills. We have the John Muir Award, which is something they can put on their CV. So there's a variety of ways that it goes beyond just the green activity that they're taking part in. And then other third sector partners that we work with can also refer people into our programme. It's just about really bringing all the dots together and joining them up. So how does it work? Usually the straight pathway would be you refer a patient by issuing a green health prescription, and the green health prescription then asks the patient to call us or email us or text us, depending on what they prefer. We then have a person-centered consultation. So there's a dedicated green health development worker who sits within Dundee's third sector interface, so at DVVA, and they hold a person-centered consultation, finding out about the need and the want, and trying to refer them to an activity that they will enjoy. The most important thing is that we'll find something that's fun, because if it's fun, then the person's going to come back and they will continue doing the activity. So it's very important for us that we stay in touch with the service user to find out if they enjoyed it, if they'd like to try something else, if there's any further support that we can offer. Working with the third sector interface is very good because it allows us to connect the person with further statutory support services or other services that are offered in the third sector for support. Also, by talking to the patients, we actually find out what they would like to do. And sometimes what somebody wants to do isn't something that we can offer at the moment. So that then enables us, or me, to go out, speak to the partners that I work with already, find out if somebody can create a new activity, and if not, if there's ways that we can find funding to make this happen. So for example, we developed an electric tricycle program for those who are less mobile or have other issues that would keep them from participating in normal cycling. Also, Dundee is very hilly, so the electric really helps people to get about, and the program has been so successful that we're now expanding to a local hospital, and we have over 200 people using our bikes. And then, yeah, it's about participating, nature-based interventions. During COVID, we had online classes. We will continue to offer online classes, or maybe have an outdoor class and share this online with people who are unable to join or unable to travel in, to make it as accessible as possible. And then we also pulled together lots of self-led activities which already existed, but we also created new ones such as health walks and other interesting maps about architecture. For example, that we had available to just spice it up. I think everybody has been walking lots during the pandemic, and at some point you just need something different to look forward to on your daily walk. We're open to self-referrals, and we also encourage people to bring a friend. For initial meetings, we have a Green Health buddy. So that means if somebody is a bit too scared or anxious to join a new activity, then we can link them up with a Green Health buddy who will meet them at the activity and do it with them until they've made a friend in the group and they are comfortable to go on their own. So how do I promote this to the public? So apart from having GPs and primary and secondary care services issue these, we want people to self-refer, but also to increase their walking and cycling and engagement with nature in general. So we created a website, which you can look at in your own time, greenhealth.scot. We developed various products, such as a map of our outdoor gyms and further walking maps. And then we have launched a variety of marketing campaigns. So we actually got lots of funding for these, for the television, for online, for outdoor, for radio, for social media, for bus stops, just trying to raise awareness of what we should do and why we should do it to get people to engage with nature more. We host Green Health Week, which has just been, and we work with social media. So the TV campaign for Green Health prescriptions was on Sky for 3 months, and that led to an increase in self-referrals, which was absolutely fantastic. So we actually filmed people who participate in the program to share their stories. And you can watch those videos on our website if you're interested. This is a campaign that we did to encourage people to walk more. So we created 18 posters which were on bus stops all across the city and focusing more on deprived areas as well, to explain to people why they should walk. And that was actually quite effective. We saw more people walking, and people have talked about walking and, oh, did you know that? So that was quite a nice little thing. And then Green Health Week. So this is something that all Green Health partnerships are doing once a year. So it's just been on the 8th of May. We had over 50 activities delivered by 25 partners. Because of the pandemic, they were online, some were outdoor in person. We had booking systems in place, but partners also put together a variety of self-led activities and bingos and treasure hunts all across the city. And then with the Science Centre, we developed some herb home kits, and there were a couple of experiments added to those as well. There were over 600 of those, and they were all taken within a day, which was quite fantastic. Yeah, and then this is our latest project. So that's our cycle map in Dundee, and currently we're working on promoting cycling. So the next campaign, hopefully launching next week, so this is a sneak peek, is Dundee is Cycling. We're going to promote the use of our greenways, all the latest developments that happened, and all the cycling groups that we have locally, which again, really cater to every age and ability group. So apart from a fantastic video, which I'm not allowed to share with you yet, we'll also have posters going up, and yeah, it'll be a really nice social media campaign, and it'll be on the radio as well. So we're trying to, yeah, get more people cycling. So that's me. Thank you very much for having me. And if you have any questions, you can always drop me an email.
Wow. That's my reaction. Wow. And I think it probably is most other people as well. Absolutely fabulous, Viola. I knew it was brilliant, but you've just underlined how brilliant the initiative is. I won't pause with questions or remarks at the moment, but there's so many things that prompted in what you said, which I think will ring bells with lots of people who are with us this afternoon as well. So thanks again. We'll move straight on to Julie. Julie, welcome. Julie's, I can't remember your official title, Julie, but I know you're with NASP, and you're the Eastern Region Coordinator, is that right? And you're going to tell us about NASP.
Yeah, sorry guys, my headset is playing up, which means if it is interfering with my camera, so there's going to be no me to see, I'm afraid, and I've got no IT to help me sort it out. But yeah, I'm Judy Ringer. I am the Eastern Region Coordinator for the Thriving Communities Programme for the National Academy for Social Prescribing, currently on secondment from South Norfolk and Broadland Council, where I sit within the Help Hub and the social prescribers. So I do have a little bit of background along the social prescribing route. Just a quick bit of information about the National Academy. NASP successfully made an application to the Charities Commission in 2020 to become a registered charity. It was successful, and it is now the first charity dedicated to social prescribing across the country. We are working very closely with our partners, both across the region. So the Eastern region for me goes from Norfolk to Hertfordshire, encompassing Suffolk, Essex, Cambridgeshire and Bedfordshire. My partners, you've obviously met one of them already, Giles Merritt from Natural England. I've got Kimberly White for Sport England, Alan Nichols from the Money and Pensions Service, and Dulcie Christmas from the Arts Council, working alongside, and we also look at the NHS charities together, the Sir Tom Moore money. And we've been working closely now since I've been in post, and that was the end part of October 2020. I'm closely supported by Sian, who's gone off screen, and Tim and Philigoff. So they've been helping me since day one, alongside Mark Devenny for South Norfolk and Broadland Council. So what is the Thriving Communities Programme? It's a new national support programme for the voluntary community, faith and social enterprise groups, supporting communities impacted by COVID and health inequalities. We celebrate, share and support the work of the local VCFSE groups through various means. And I did post earlier in the chat the web link to the National Academy for Social Prescribing, and you can go to the Thriving Communities page. And we're looking quite closely in my role at 4 areas. The first one's the Thriving Communities Fund, and Nigel's obviously been successful through that fund. And it's supporting local voluntary community groups again, to set up new initiatives to help work along social prescribing and provide more community activities. We have the Ideas Hub, and that's where people can share their ideas, read other people's stories, and bring together a network to be able to champion success, share the challenges and support each other together. We have found it really helpful, because if some of our voluntary groups are starting something new or they're looking for support from others, they can put their story out there on the Ideas Hub and people are linking in with them. And to say, well, I've already done that and this is where I found a hiccup, or have you tried this because that worked for us? So we're really pleased that that's working well. We then have the Thriving Communities Network, and again, it's all about connecting people. So it's about connecting myself with a community group. I'm based in Norfolk, so for me, being connected with community groups in Hertfordshire, Cambridgeshire, it's all new areas, and I've been able, through the Thriving Communities Network, to hook people in together. One of a good example of this is actually the men's sheds. So we have a men's shed in Norfolk that's now talking to men's shed in Essex. They can share ideas, and we can help support. I can help support them alongside Giles and Kimberly where necessary. And then we have the Learning Together programme. So that's free regional support, again, where we try and offer some training. We have monthly webinars. I know some of you here are registered for those monthly webinars, where we talk about various topics. We ask the audience for what they'd like to hear about, but we also, as a regional leads, we come together and we come up with the ideas that we think you might like to hear about. We have done some on social prescribing. Tim officiated at that one. We've got one on loneliness and isolation coming up, and we've also hopefully in the future going to be hearing from our regional partners on what what their area of expertise is doing and what you would have access to. So these are monthly. Once you sign up, if you choose to sign up to the National Academy, you will be informed of when the webinars are, and you can join them. They are always recorded, so if you can't make them, you can catch up at a time that's convenient for you. And then the other area is the NHS Charities Together money. We have been tasked with helping people access and pointing them in the right direction. So currently in Norfolk, as Rachel said earlier, Norfolk Community Foundation are doing this alongside a Suffolk Community Foundation. So we talk to community groups that might be interested in the money, and then support them with the links and getting them through, sort of talking about what they might need to consider in their application, and working with regional leads in that area. So I am doing a pretty much whistle-stop tour because I know you've all sort of had to take a lot in this afternoon. So that is pretty much a whistle-stop tour. I'm happy to take questions afterwards if you'd like to know anything else.
Many thanks, Julie. That's great. And it really just, again, I suppose the total of this afternoon will probably make a lot of people think, my God, the complexity of it all. That's certainly one of my reactions, I think. But we've got examples of how you can make your way through it. I mean, Viola's presentation, okay, it's Scotland, and they do different up there, don't they? But, wow, what an achievement. And I was particularly interested, perhaps I can kick off the sort of question session with a couple of questions to you, Viola, about what you said. And I was particularly struck by, I suppose, the point that you made about there are different sorts of social prescribers, that we've been talking about link workers, but you've broadened the net a bit, I think. That's the first point. I was really taken with the amount of effort and no doubt money that's gone into marketing and that promotional activity of the project, which is absolutely fabulous. And the final point, really, which I know some of the other people on this call, particularly those involved in the Families Connect project, which is the project that Julie referred to, where we've been successful with Thriving Communities funding, is the development worker role. And very interested to hear about that, because we've had discussions recently. I think Laura Bloomfield is still here with us about a program manager role for that Families Connect program, which has a lot of, shall we say, resonance with the sort of things that your development worker is doing, I think. So that was very helpful. Any thoughts on what I've said about particularly the first couple of points, I suppose?
Yes, so we have social prescribers, link workers who are within primary care, and they take care of the welfare aspect, food poverty, benefits, and also mental health and physical health. But it depends on the urgency. And although all social prescribers here have access to nature-based interventions, and I'm more than convinced that accessing nature reduces your stress levels and then helps you deal with life struggles better, it isn't always on the forefront of what the social prescribers do. So although they use what we do, we thought it would be good to link with your third point, the development worker role, to actually have a dedicated development worker. She plays a very important role in keeping our network up to date. So you all know this, working with the third sector, many things happen at different times and they change. And they don't always update their websites. Some don't have a website, others have Facebook. And it's just, you need a dedicated person to stay on top of what's happening, to make sure that we can make an appropriate referral. And at the same time, a person who has a connection to the activities as well, so that they can answer any questions the service user might have. And again, it's just to take the pressure off the link workers and in a way create a green link worker that just links them with the existing provision. And marketing and funding, I like getting funding. I think once one understands what can be what can be match funded and what in-kind funding is. There are actually many ways to get more for what is spent already. Because I'm a council employee, when the council spends money, for example, on paths improvement, from core funding, this can be matched. Up here, we have a funding body called Paths for All. So they're about paths. So if I need new signage or activity boards or these kind of things, I can get match funding because money has already been spent. And this works with a variety of funding partners. So once the funding landscape is clear, it's important to stay in touch with partners to find out which money they spent already and if there's a way to make that money go further with match funding.
Thank you. Grace, over to you. Have you been looking at the chat? Or is there anything in there that we need to pick up, do you think?
There's a question again from Annie to you, Viola. If you had to choose one aspect that makes the biggest contribution to the success of your initiative, what would it be?
Awareness.
Can you explain?
Awareness in the sense that people need to know why nature is good for them, how they can engage with, what the pathways are, what's available to them, which support's available to them. So all these wonderful activities can be out there and we can work really hard on creating strategies. But if the people, and this is for people, if they don't know it's there for them and they don't know how to get to it, then the impact is really limited. And I think that's why I've spent so much money on marketing, to raise that awareness, to shout about it, because we need to shout about it.
Great, thanks. And that's all we have. I don't know if anyone else has any question that'd like to chip in live. Tim, yeah.
So thanks so much, Viola. That was really exciting. I just wanted to raise the fact that we have health and wellbeing coaches coming on stream in England, and whether some of the function you're describing, the sort of green health and wellbeing coach, is something that we might be expecting those workers as well as social prescribers to pick up. And really just to reinforce everything you're saying about the importance of local networking, because I think, you know, even between different bits of Norfolk, there'll be different assets that need linking together to get the best for the social prescribers and anyone else to link into, to make sure that people get to the way of staying healthy that makes sense to them. And that will be different in different places. But thanks very much for your presentation, really interesting.
Coming back on that point, Tim, I think that really underlines one of the issues, I think, for us, which is that there are already community enablement officers, community development workers, a whole host of people doing this sort of stuff out there. And yes, we need to network, but maybe we also need at the same time to clarify and rationalize contributions, particularly if, as you say, if we've got a new set of people coming along coaching in health and well-being. What do you think?
My sense is that there is enough work for everyone to be doing. It's just that we confuse the hell out of each other nearly all the time. And therefore, if we can understand the system we're functioning in, it will become a system. It isn't actually a system at the moment. It's lots of separate systems that don't really join up properly. And, you know, the work Viola has done describes how you get those networks working. That's the bit we all need to be doing. So if you've got community development workers and social prescribers and health and wellbeing coaches, you know, you're lucky. Great. Use them. Make sure that Helen and others are linked in, and you've got this, you know, the direct experience of using service, all that stuff in one place. It's an incredible resource to have, but we're not always as good at joining it all up as we should be.
Yeah, thanks. I'm conscious of time, folks. I think we're coming up to just about 5 minutes or so before we're due to finish. I had hoped we'd have a bit more time for discussion, but you know, that's the way these things go. What I will say is that, as we've found on other events like this, very often it raises a whole lot of issues that some people feel are so important they want to carry on the discussion, but they also want to carry on the discussion with a view to action. And we've got a couple of examples of that now from other workshops that we've held, where things are kicking off or starting to kick off along those lines. And one which Simon Hamilton, who's with us, is leading on next week, is called at the moment Place Perfect. And that came from one of our workshops around improving, particularly, I think, urban environments making them more livable, less car dependent, more green space, etc. So that's a really good example of something that's come from one of these workshops. I think this is a subject that has got a lot of legs, as they say, and therefore is something that we do need to take forward. I've been having discussions with a number of people, some of them on the call today, about a possible project for the NHS charities funding that's been referred to on this topic of green social prescribing. And some of those discussions have been very encouraging and positive. So there is a specific project possibly in the making there, based, I think, on what we've heard today and thoughts around that. But I would ask that if anyone is interested in either taking part in that very specific discussion about a particular project, or more generally around ways forward with green social prescribing more generally, then please let me know. I will be emailing you all the people that registered who didn't manage to get to us today as well, with a copy of the slides that everyone has used today. So those that have used slides, can you please send them to me, ideally as PDFs, that would be helpful. A copy of the chat, so you can see, again, contact details and questions and other information which may be useful. And I've also been recording this. I forgot to mention that at the beginning, so apologies for anyone who feels a bit embarrassed about how they've appeared on screen, but it's too late, folks. You're on there. I'm going to record it. I've recorded it. I will put a link on YouTube for you and others to look at the recording, so you can relive, you know, the presentations and so on. And I would also just make a reference to the last slide that I showed you, which you will see, where there is both the link through to the Conservation Volunteers video, which is just under 5 minutes long, but also one that is literally no longer than a minute. And I had hoped to show this as almost a parting shot because it is so inspirational. But I won't dare test the internet once more. I think we'll just have to leave it to lie, I think, and you can look at that at your leisure, as they say. That's all I've got to say. Is there anything else people would like to ask urgently before we disappear? Any hands going up or questions in the chat? Thanks from people. Thank you for your thanks. If that is it, well, thank you all again for coming along, and thank you again to all the presenters and for the effort you put into preparing and presenting. Been very valuable, I think. I don't know about you, but I'm going away energized from tonight. Maybe because I'm going on holiday for the next few days, but there we are, you know. I shall be in touch next week. Thank you all very much for your participation. Have a nice evening. Bye.
Thanks, Nigel. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.